Albert took the letter from Human Resources from his pocket and put it on the mantelpiece. "I'll open it in a bit," he reassured himself, "once I've got myself settled." He rested the crumpled envelope next to his paltry cluster of Christmas cards. Although he'd delivered thousands on his round, this year he'd received only 3. One was from Smiler, who gave cards to everyone in the office. One was from his mam's second cousin in Blackburn, whom Albert hadn't seen for years and who always called him Alfred. And one was from his dentist, and that hadn't even been signed by hand, but printed with the signatures of everyone who worked in the surgery. But he could hardly complain. He hadn't sent a single Christmas card since his mam had stopped doing it from both of them when she became too ill. Since then the number that arrived at the house had dwindled each year. But he told himself he preferred it this way, and tried not to feel a pang of sadness when confronted with the stark evidence of how few people cared about him. Albert hadn't bothered putting up a single Christmas decoration, either. He hadn't seen the point. It wasn't as if he was expecting any visitors. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't had any visitors all year, not unless you counted the man who'd come round to fit his new smart electricity meter, or the plumber who'd come to unblock the sink and told him off for scraping bits of food down the plug hole. Oh, and that time in the summer, when the kids from next door threw their ball into my backyard. He remembered how flustered he'd been when he'd answered the doorbell and the kid's dad had invited himself in and sauntered through the house to get to the yard. Once he'd found the ball, he'd stood in the kitchen with it tucked under his arm, asking Albert what he thought about the current form of Toddington FC. Albert hadn't known what to say, so had resorted to discussing the weather. When that topic of conversation had dried up, the ensuing awkwardness had sent his neighbour retreating to the door. No one had set foot over Albert's threshold since.